Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to what is going to be a very interesting webinar today. We want you to be the first to see Adapttech's new Insight product range for 2022. It's wonderful for you to join us here today. Thank you for joining us. We actually have a very exciting range of new developments to share with you for 22, responding to requests for a scannerless system, reduced hardware costs, and improved data. So as part of our mission to help speed up the lower limb socket fitting process, I think you're going to find out some very interesting developments in our product portfolio here today. Okay, next slide, please. So joining us today to find out more about our new technologies, you'll be hearing from our special guests and members of our team. We have Federico Carpentiero, who is our CEO, Vanessa Carvalho, Cassandra Delgado, Frederic Desprez, and Mark Ford joining us from the US. And let me tell you a little bit about our organization. So Adapttech is a biomedical innovation company. Our goal really is to bring smart technologies to market for the prosthetics part of the marketplace of O&P. And really our mission is to empower clinicians to help them with a better socket fitting process, but also, as you'll learn, we are also moving into monitoring methods to really improve patient outcomes, because really our goal is to provide quality of life for everybody in the process of lower limb prosthetics. And we're going to learn more about how that is actually manifest in the new products that we're going to be sharing today. So if I can, I'll hand over to you, Fred, and you can expand a little bit more on our technology.
Thank you, Phil, and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Really excited to be here today presenting you the new Insight range and all the things we've been working in the past year to get to you today. And I would like to start just pointing out why we started working on this. And the reason was that clearly there are a lot of challenges with socket fitting, and being the socket one of the most important parts on a lower limb prosthetic in order to allow the amputee to be comfortable and actually be able to perform his daily life as normally as possible. We saw that we really needed to address this problem. And the reason for this process to be so difficult and present so many challenges is that it is a very subjective process at the moment. It ends up being quite a lot of trial and error cycle where the prosthetist has to depend a lot on his own experience or on the feedback from the amputees, and that's not always easy, because not all amputees are able to provide very accurate feedback about what they're feeling, or if they are new amputees, they don't even know how it is supposed to feel. So it's quite hard for both sides to be able to communicate and get to a good solution without spending a lot of time and a lot of attempts to get there. And that's why we created Insight. Next slide, please. And what we are here to present you today is, on one side, the Insight Digitizer. So it's a state-of-the-art digitizer able to create a 3D shape of the prosthetic socket, of the inner surface of the prosthetic socket for a lower limb prosthetic. And on the other side, we have Insight Sense, so a real-time analysis system that will allow you to see how the pressures are changing in the residual limb socket interface and relate that information with the gait cycles of that amputee. So this is a very portable system that you will be able to see in more advanced in the presentation, how that can impact the work you're doing. Next slide, please. And if we will also be showing you how you can merge both these technologies together, so the 3D modeling and the pressure sensing technology, into a very accurate high resolution system where you'll be able to see these changes from pressure on the actual high resolution 3D model of the socket of each specific patient, and based on that be able to understand what's wrong and what needs to be corrected, and immediately test if those modifications were successful or not. So without further delays, I will pass on to Vanessa, which is actually back to Phil, and Phil can let you on to the rest of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred. Yeah, so I guess we all have our favorites, right? And I'm very excited about the Insight Sense. I mentioned at the beginning of our presentation that we have responded to a lot of the feedback from the market, as we've been in the market now for a couple of years. So as Fred says, we're going to be joined by a new member of our team, Vanessa. And Vanessa, you're ready to talk to us about Insight Sense, I hope. Over to you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Fred. So we're beginning with our Insight Sense. Insight Sense is a portable tool that allows you to analyze pressure inside your patient socket in real time. The socket pressure data is displayed on a generic 3D model and also with predetermined pressure sensor locations. It's good to smaller clinics, to clinicians who work remotely, and also to practices who regularly work with prosthetic residents. So Insight Sense generates a 3D model through by measurement technology to create a digital copy of the patient's socket. And with this 3D model, we will be able to do static and dynamic acquisitions. This unique software tools allows clinicians to locate preset sensor patterns inside of the digital socket that will then be placed in the actual patient socket. This approach guarantees an optimal coverage and sensor distribution to ensure that every pressure acquisition provides relevant data for the socket fitting. You can do two types of acquisitions, dynamic and static, where you can evaluate how the socket is managing the weight of your patient to check the alignment and also to understand what is going on with the pressure distribution while your patient is walking. Next slide, please. So it's important for you to know that the measured pressure is relative and not absolute. So the color coding is not qualitative, but comparative. That means that if you see whole red, I mean, it does not necessarily mean that it's bad, but it means that it's the higher pressure that our sensors will record and persist. Next, please. The app also allows you to create a report of the acquisition, showing the different pressure distribution in the different gate phases that can be then quickly exported as a PDF that you can print or email to a doctor or to an insurance company. Also is compatible with all the common sockets for lower limb amputees. So you have different types of sockets on the Insight app with the feature of Insight Sense. You will select the type of amputation, the socket type that you have, and then you will insert the respective measurements. It will create a 3D generical model that you can then use to measure the pressure inside your socket. This allows you to quickly have a quantitative data of the patient condition rather than depending on the patient feedback. Next. You will see now a little video with the workflow of Insight Sense. After you create an entry and create the patient, you will select the type of amputation that your patient has. And then the app will tell you to select the type of socket that you have and also his measures, the measures that your patient has. This will allow the app to create a 3D generical model, and then you will be able to choose the amount of sensors that you want to use. You can use until 8 sensors inside the socket, both in transtibial and then transfemoral sockets, and you will choose the location of each sensor strip. The last part before the acquisition is to choose the ID of the sensors that you have. You have 3 types of sizes for sensors, and you will select the correct ID and also the position for that ID. You can put it on the bottom of your socket, on the middle of the socket, and you can do it for all of them at the same time or for each one differently. After choosing every sensor strip, you will put it inside the socket, connect all the wearables, and then your acquisition will start. After your acquisition, you will be able to review everything. If you do a dynamic acquisition, you will see an average for each gate phase and also for a gate completely. You can review everything and then export the pressure reports. So next slide, please. In summary, Sense allows you to analyze pressures up to 64 different points through a 3D socket model by measurements. and it's also compatible with different types of sockets. Now I will pass the word to Cassandra, that is already using our system, and she's going to share with you her testimony and her feedback of Insight Sense. Cassandra?
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. My name is Cassandra Delgado. I'm a clinical director at a practice in New York. I've been really fortunate to be able to use the Insight system for the past almost 2 years now. And when Insight Sense became available, it became a really unique option for me because I'm not always in the clinic, right? I'm going to nursing homes, to physical therapy appointments. I'm kind of running all over the place. Sometimes I'm not always in our home office. Sometimes I'm in other offices. And so having the ability to be able to take this technology literally anywhere with me has been remarkable and very, very helpful. So the first case study I just want to go over is Mitch. He is a 40-year-old male. He had sepsis about 2 years ago, which necessitated quadrimemal amputations. And so he is a big guy. He's 6'8", over 300 pounds. He's a very motivated individual and the father of 2 small children. And the challenge with Mitch is because of his size and stature, because he's unable to grab onto the parallel bars to help pick himself up and stand up, we always see him at his physical therapy clinic. One, just because he's such an involved patient, we want to have a lot of teamwork working on him together, but then also for safety. They have special harnesses and everything to help hold him up that we just don't have in our clinic. So let's go on to the next slide. And for Mitch, one of the things that we really wanted to be mindful of is his skin. Because of the severe amputations that he had to have, he has highly complicated limbs. He has severe nerve pain, a lot of those phantom sensations, significant scar tissue. And what we know with skin that is this impaired, especially with skin grafts and fragile tissue, is that it does not have good sensation always. And so that's something I had to be very, very mindful about. And in the next slide, you'll see where he has both limbs pretty impacted by this as well. Just a lot of skin grafts, a lot of scar tissue that we had to be very, very careful of. Next slide. Perfect. The transtibial side, a little bit less affected, still reduced range of motion, some valgum in that knee, having to be very mindful of it. And this can be difficult for any prosthetic user to have numbness on their limb. You know, it makes it very challenging to give us accurate feedback, but it also makes it hard when they're a brand new amputee as well. So when you have a brand new patient that has very involved limbs, it makes it challenging to be able to get information back from them. It's hard for them to report what they are feeling back to us as prosthetists. Next slide. And so with all of that, Mitch, whenever he would go to stand up for the first time, because he doesn't have hands to grab onto the bars, because he's, you know, using all of his effort and energy to stand up, it's very challenging for him to give me feedback. Plus, the feedback he would give me would be very vague just because he doesn't have a lot of good sensation in his limbs. And so with him, I was able to put sensors into his socket and take that to the physical therapy visit and let him stand and get that data and get those pressures reported back to me. So I would know where to make adjustments. I would know what his volume is like and have a better understanding of his fit. Generally, you can line the socket fully with as many sensors as you'd like. In the beginning, sometimes I like to just have a general idea of what my socket pressures are. So you can see those 5 indicators in that knee disarticulation socket, those 5 strips. So that just gives me a general sense of how are we fitting into the socket. And then if there's any areas that I am concerned specifically about, right, where those condyles are hitting or some anterior distal discomfort, then, you know, I will make sure that I move those sensors and get a good reading and a good outcome. Next slide. All right, so one of the, again, main benefits with being able to use this technology is that I can take it anywhere with me, right? So I was able to take it to his physical therapist office. It was great education for the physical therapist too, so that they could visually see what was going on inside the socket. So when I would describe to them, you know, the patient is losing volume, they're bottoming out in their socket, the physical therapist and the patient had a visual indicator of what that would look like. Also with Mitch, because he's still so brand new, he has limited endurance of standing, right? When he's standing, I can't ask him a lot of questions because he needs to sit down quickly after that, right? And so with that, having the ability to record this data too and go back and watch it and say, okay, when he was standing, this is what it looked like, this is what I can anticipate, because I need to be very, very careful about where I'm applying pressures on that limb. Next slide. All right, we'll let Mark take over on this to just talk about what the package for the Insight Sense involves.
Thank you, Cassandra. We're really excited, as Phil said earlier, about the introduction of the Insight Sense. It's been really remarkable to see the Adapttech development team create this new technology from where they started with. The ability to see what's going on in a socket in real time with the patient, either standing statically, as Cassandra just showed us, or dynamically as the patient walks, is a huge leap forward for clinicians. The ability to know what's really going on inside that socket. As Cassandra showed us, with an extreme case of where, getting that accurate feedback to make successful sockets is such a challenge. There's also the wide range of patients that come into your office every day that are diabetic or cardiovascular, who they have, their level of insensate issues with their limbs. And so their ability to communicate to you what they're feeling is a real challenge. And so, this insight technology that allows us to have a window into what's going on in the socket is a huge leap forward. Sense allows that then to take an extra step, and that we don't need the original digitizer that was part of the original Insight system in order to be able to access that socket pressure technology. And that really, we think, is a huge step that will allow more practices to have the benefit of using this on a day in and day out basis. The product of the Insight Sense includes, when it comes to you, the iPad, the software app, the wearables that are essentially what are connected to the sensor strips that are inside the socket. The wearables then tell us where the patient is in space, but also gathers the data that's coming to it on an ongoing basis from those sensor strips. And then that communicates through Bluetooth to the iPad. So there's no tethering of the patient. As the patient walks, you can walk right with them, show them what's going on the iPad as to where the pressures are occurring throughout their gait cycle. And that whole process then becomes very manageable in a routine prosthetic patient care process. You're talking about, with Insight Sense, you're talking about a full setup time, maybe 10 minutes. And once you become proficient with it, there certainly is a learning curve. No question, every new technology has a bit of a learning curve. But once you're over that learning curve, after you've done it 3 or 4 times, you're really able to make this a easy to use system in your patient care process that will allow you to get that data so that you can get to a successful fitting faster, allow you to document what's going on in the socket for your patient records. And then it'll allow you to be much more efficient with your clinician and your technician's time, as they're able to pinpoint exactly where they need to make improvements to the diagnostic sockets that lead you to a definitive and getting you to billable time much faster. So this is everything that's in the Insight Sense. The other great thing about the Insight Sense is that Adapttech has been able to bring the pricing down considerably, since it doesn't incorporate the digitizer as part of this particular package. It allows it to be an economical option for just about any clinic operating in the US. With all of that. So we're very excited about where this is going to allow clinicians to take their skills, because now they have a brand new tool that gives them really insight into what's going on inside that socket on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please. So if you want to see the Insight Sense for yourself, we certainly realize that clinicians love to get their hands on new technology. They love to play with it and see what it can do, so they really understand it in depth. Adapttech is going to be at these next 3 upcoming major meetings. We'd love to see any and all of you guys that might be in Atlanta next week at the Academy meeting. So stop by. Cassandra will be in the booth, as will several other of us from Adapttech. So we'd love to show you exactly how the technology works. We'll then be at the OT World meeting and working with our new German distributor. Frederick's done a great job of setting up distributors and opening up the European market to Adapttech. And then we'll be in at the AOPA meeting in San Antonio towards the end of the year, and you'll be able to see a full system that will be there. We're also planning to have a patient there, a patient model there. So you'll be able to see real time with a patient walking exactly what's going on throughout that whole process. Phil, if you want to go ahead and lead us on to the next stage, that'd be great.
Mark, just one question, if I may just pose to you. I mean, obviously, we saw Mitch's case study there, a highly complex patient. Presumably, as you've been traveling around the States, you've been seeing Insight being applied to more regular type patient outcomes.
Yeah, I think that the challenges that Mitch shows and Cassandra was able to walk you through all through is the extreme of that example, right? But it's not where the Adapttech system and Adapttech technologies have application beyond that. That 65-year-old diabetic grandmother that walks in really has a challenge of trying to explain to you what she's feeling. It's especially applicable too when you talk about a brand new amputee. If you talk about a brand new amputee, and we've all been in those first fittings with a brand new amputee, and within the first 5 minutes, the clinicians really, because they don't have a lot of other options, are saying to the patient, how's that feel? And if you think about it, as a brand new amputee, they have no frame of reference. It's like saying to you, I put on a new pair of boots, and how are they supposed to feel? Well, different cowboy boots feel different than my tennis shoes. How are they supposed to feel? But until I've worn them for the first time and I have experience with them, I really don't know what the differences are. Is this good? Is this bad? New amputees in particular, it's a huge challenge for them to understand that. With the Insight system, you can show them visually. Keep in mind, a huge percentage of your patients are just inherently visual learners. So you're able to show those patients as they're moving, as they're walking, and relate it. This is what you're feeling. This is where the pressures are as you're walking. It's a whole game changer in how clinicians, and Cassandra has said this many times in the past, in how she communicates to her patient, how she shows them and explains to them what's going on in their socket. It's not theoretical when you can show them the actual images in real time. So it makes a huge difference in a huge range of the patients. We think the Insight the Sense system is really probably applicable in the biomeasurement form without using the digitizer, probably for 70 to 80% of the patients. The thing that I've kind of come up with myself is if you're putting the patient in an off-the-shelf liner, Insight Sense will probably work for you. If this is a patient that has an unusually shaped limb, then you're probably going to need to use the digitizer so you get the exact shape that you need for that patient. If you're using a custom liner, that's who you're going to be needing the digitizer for. But if it's an off-the-shelf liner kind of patient, Insight Sense should work great. That's a huge range of your patients that you can help.
Great. So I guess at the event next week, you'll be able to expand more on how prices have come down for this lower cost system and likewise the portability of it compared to obviously the larger scale system, which we're just going to talk about now. So thanks, Mark. Let's move into the digitizer. And before we do so, if I could just remind everybody, there is a chat feature in the Zoom system, as you probably well know, and a Q&A system as well. So please feel free to pose your questions as we go through the balance of today's presentation. Great. All right. So Vanessa, are you ready to go?
Yes, thanks, Phil. So when we go out Insight Digitizer, the Insight Digitizer is a standalone digitizer for prosthetic sockets and also plaster casts that can create a high-resolution 3D model for replication with a web-based app that is also developed by Adapttech. This product is targeted to central fabrications and also large clinic groups and to any clinic that uses CAD/CAM software to carve sockets or 3D printers. One of the features of Insight Digitizer is that it can precisely digitize all types of materials that are used to manufacture a lower limb socket for a prosthetic leg. We tested the system and we discovered that if you use a diagnostic socket or a carbon fiber socket that is highly reflective, it can be also digitized, but you need to use a scanning spray that we can also provide it. The Insight Digitizer was designed with the goal to be part of a socket replication workflow that can create a high-resolution 3D model that can then be used quickly to replace a damaged socket of your patient or to have a backup prosthesis that your patient wants, or also to create a new socket if they have different activities. Next slide, please. The web app will also allow you to export an STL file that you can then use to any CAD/CAM software and program that is available in the ONP market. Next, please. The web app that we created allows a clinic to manage the 3D files produced by the Insight Digitizer, creating a digital storage of the patient socket. You can see all the measures of your socket. You can add tags. You can add notes to your socket, and you will be able to also export the STL as I told you before. Next, please. So the Insight Digitizer allows you to create a high resolution 3D model with a precise resolution under 1 millimeter. It takes about 12 minutes to have the STL file on your computer already processed, and it's compatible with different types of sockets on plaster casts. Next, please. In summary, so you can have in mind how it works. After you prepare your socket for scanning, you need to cover all the holes. You need to use the scanning spray if you have any shiny material. You will put the socket inside your digitizer, adjust the height of the socket creeper, put it there well fixed, close the scanner, and then use the Insight Digitizer web app to start scanning. When the scanning is finished, you can remove the socket from the Insight Digitizer and then clean it if it's needed. Next, please. I will now pass the word to Frederic, so he can talk about the package of Insight Digitizer.
Thanks, Vanessa. Hi, everybody. So let me sum up for you what is included in our Insight Digitizer. That's very easy, actually. When you order an Insight Digitizer, you're going to receive the Insight equipment, the digitizer itself. Then you have access to the high precision web application, which goes with a license. And we also include, together with the digitizer, a sample of the scanning spray, which we recommend, which will allow you to scan immediately any socket, even transparent socket or shiny material, as Vanessa explained to you. The key feature, I think you have understood with the explanation of Vanessa, you can scan in high precision, you can replicate any socket, you can store digitally all your patient sockets and follow them all over the years. And then you have the capability also to export the 3D model as a STL file to a 3D printer or to your CAD/CAM software, to any carver or robots in order to carve a positive model and then process with the fabrication of your sockets. So we can arrange with Mark any private demo, and we can also share with you the STL file of a high precision scan if you want to use it in your CAD/CAM software in order to see how easy it is. Next slide, please. So as Mark mentioned to you, I mean, we are introducing you today through a webinar, our new range, but there is nothing better than a face-to-face good old-style meeting. And we are lucky this year, two of the greatest world orthopedic exhibitions are back. So as far as I'm concerned, in Europe, I will be in Germany with the team mid-May for OT World. We will exhibit on the booth of our new German partner, the company Gunther Bionics. We will have a patient, the digitizer, and we will organize some demo all over the Congress. And Mark will welcome you together with our American partner, Cascade, and September in San Antonio for the EOPA.
Frederic, thank you. That's excellent. So I guess that just for clarity, we have gone through the Insight Sense, which of course is the scannerless system, the lightweight system, lower cost. We've also just now gone through the digitizer, which of course is the very high resolution 3D scanner. And now we're going to just finalize the presentation with the description of the complete system. So the Insight Pro is the complete range. So again, Vanessa, are you ready to take over?
Yes, sure. So to finalize, the Insight Pro is an ensemble of all Adapttech's products that makes the product ideal to assess and monitor the fit of your patient's lower limb prosthetic socket in real time, both inside and outside the clinic with the Insight Sense feature. You can use this unique technology to deliver an improved fit more efficiently and to quickly replicate or make changes to your patient's prosthetic sockets. Next slide, please. Previous slide, please. Sorry. So in summary, the Insight Pro combines all the features of Insight Digitizer and Insight Sense, allowing you to have a digital storage of your patient's sockets, to digitize plaster casts, to replicate sockets, to export the 3D model in an STL file format, to analyze pressure with a 3D biomeasurement socket and preset sensor locations, and also to export the pressure report. In both cases, we have socket compatibility, and Insight Pro allows you also to use it together, so you can do an analysis of a socket, a pressure inside a socket, with a real socket. I mean, you can digitize your socket and then use that file to do an analysis of pressure. Next slide, please. I will now like to share with you a little video comparing two acquisitions before and after some adjustments on the socket and also on the alignment. On the left, you can see that on the anterior wall, on the tibia, you can see a high pressure, and then the prosthetist did some changes and the pressure disappeared. The alignment also was changed, so you can see on the lateral and medium walls. So you can have an idea of the benefits of Adapttech's products. Cassandra will share with you her experience next. Next slide.
Thanks,
please.
Vanessa. There we go. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to show you another case of just one of my patients that I have used the Insight system with. And I think one of the unique opportunities that I've experienced is that I use it on multiple patients, even patients that I feel like, oh, I can fit them. I've been fitting them for years. I know exactly how I like their fit. And so what I appreciate is that I'm able to still learn from those patients. I'm still able to learn, and it teaches me as I go. I have seen times where, I always bench align this foot this way. And every time I realize that I am, changing this screw and turning that screw, and it teaches me over time, essentially, where I'm constantly saying, I always get pressure right there every time. And, having that visual reminder for me, it has improved how I do clinical practice. And so for this case study, we're going to look at Chris. Chris has just a really impaired limb in a different way. She had a knee replacement that was set at an improper angle, and then her distal tibia is about, on a good day, maybe 3.5 inches. And then she has another probably 4 inches of distal just tissue after that. She's definitely a candidate for a revision, but is very apprehensive about getting a revision surgery. And so she can be a challenging fit to control good stability within her socket. And so I use the Insight system in combination with a BOA adjustable fit socket, which works out very, very nicely to be able to make sure that you are having those panels give good pressure in the right spots on the limb. And so if we can go to the next slide, Chris is one that I use the digitizer part. So I did the full scan of her socket, and I wanted to do that with the panels just to make sure I had everything in the right placement. And so I put sensors on the 2 pretibial panels, those windows of the BOA. I put one on the posterior calf panel, and then I put one between just straight directly where the tibia would hit. The main thing is because that tibia is so short, right, the likelihood of it moving within that socket and hitting the front part of that socket is very, very high. Hence why we put pretibial pads and allow that volume control there. And so I just wanted to make sure that that small tibia wasn't going to have impacts along the front of that socket wall, because she is very sensitive there. And what I noticed when I did this data acquisition with her is that medial pad was lighting up way more than my lateral pad. And what I found was that that medial pad placement, that window cutout that I had done, was just too close to that tibia. I was just getting way too much pressure there. The patient couldn't really feel it. She's like, yeah, it just feels tight, but that would have absolutely led to skin breakdown over a period of time. And so having that would have easily been a remake to the socket, right? So I did that in the first check socket. And then I realized that that panel was just off, and it was off by, just a little tiny shim over, but it showed me that I needed to make a change there so that the panels would have a more equal distribution. And so that was a really saver for me, because I would have had to relaminate a socket and remake a socket, because that absolutely would have been an improper placement of that panel. Next slide. So this is the check socket that I did the fitting in. And the other thing that I noticed was that when we did the data acquisition, the bottom sensors were lighting up as having significantly more pressure than the top part of that panel was. And so I realized, just based off the contour of her limb, that those pads that you skive and place on the inside windows, you can see that orange color there, those needed to be contoured more appropriately. So as she tightened down that dial, we had more of a contoured concave surface going against her limb, whereas before it had been more flat. And so we were getting this pressure down here and very little pressure up there. Again, when we have that total contact fit, when we're trying to equally control volume, we want it to cup right around the limb, because what happens, right, when we get that pressure down below, it's going to push volume back up, and then she's going to have this ballooning effect where we're choking the bottom of the limb and then pushing fluid up, and that becomes very uncomfortable to a user throughout the course of the day. So that instantly allowed me to see, hey, I need to contour that pad just uniquely so that it falls flat onto her, and not just sticking out like that. So next slide. So this is Chris. This is her first time being able to walk without a walker. There's a resident sitting in the back over there. So working with residents, it's really great to see them be able to use this technology to learn. It's a learning process for everyone. The patient's able to see, this patient especially, because she had a history of having such a bad knee for so long. She walked with a very poor gait before her amputations. And so whenever she would walk and tighten up that quad, we have to tell patients, tighten those muscles, tighten those muscles. We can visually see the different pressures she gets when she tightens those muscles and walks properly, compared to when she's kind of slacking off or getting tired and walking. We see different changes within the socket too. So as a visual cue for her, it was very helpful. For me, it was helpful to know how she may progress throughout the course of the day. And then the resident, just a massive learning experience, because we're able to go back, we're able to talk about the patient, we're able to say, okay, this is what we saw. These were the alignment changes we needed to make. Why did we need to make them? What would have this caused down the road if we didn't make them now? And being able to assess gait in a way that we've never been able to before, being able to assess socket fit in a way we haven't been able to before, is really remarkable. It's exciting. I enjoy it. So on to the next slide. So this is just a quick video to give you an actual visual of how we go about putting the Insight system in and getting it digitized. So the patient will remove their socket, and then we will put sensor strips in the inside. Again, you can place these wherever you'd like, running running vertically throughout the socket. I like to start with my AP and ML. That gives me a good grounding, a good base. For those particular patients that, man, they just have a hot spot or they have a neuroma, I'll make sure that I put a sensor right over that area. So then that goes into the digitizer, which cinches down just to center the socket underneath the scanning element that will telescope down into the socket. You'll put your patient's information into the app, and then that will allow the scanner to connect. Again, this is all through Bluetooth. There's indicators on the front of the scanner that lets you know that you're being connected, as well as into the app. And so at this point, it will register the two, and it's very quick. It takes about 90 seconds to get that scan completed. Just the only things that you'll want to be mindful of if you have the Revo Fit is that I like to have all the panels flush into it, so I know where I'm starting it. I don't like them hanging out. So now you're able to see the scan that it just took. All of those little white dots are the center point of the pressure sensors. And so you're able to tell where they're at in space and where they're lining up. So any sensor that you put in there, you're able to see. You can also quickly get internal measurements of the circumference of the inside of the socket, which can be very, very helpful. Sometimes if you're trying to show, hey, what was their old socket, the inside of their old socket compared to the outside of the patient's limb, right? If they're in a 20-ply sock fit difference, you're going to be able to kind of know what does that mean in an actual number, not necessarily in a just guessing for sock ply. And so attaching the sensors now, we attach them to the wearable device. This essentially is a Bluetooth connector. So it lets the sensors show up on the screen to show where we are getting these pressures at. And then the smaller one lets us know where we're at in time and space. So it lets us know whether we're in swing phase or in stance phase, whether the patient is turning around. What you can do is you can always save this acquisition. I believe it needs about 60 seconds to save a full acquisition to have enough data gathered so that you can see each phase of gait accurately and know, because it does a really great summary for, let's say, mid stance. You can see the relative pressures all throughout mid stance and say, you know what? That's when I notice a little whip, or I notice, that's when they're putting the most of their body weight throughout the limb. That's when they might be bottoming out a little bit or dropping too far down in the socket. Same with swing phase. You can pause it during swing phase and say, wow, that socket is really drifting off of them during swing phase. We need to tighten that up a little bit. And so you can slow down these acquisitions, you can speed them up, you can look at the full set, you can look at averages throughout the course of their full gait cycle to analyze where those pressures are at. So it's really unique in that aspect because it's such a good learning tool for everyone involved. And the great part about it is you can export this data. I like to give it to some of my patients and say, hey, this is, that area we were talking about. We're going to keep a close eye on them. We will send these to insurance companies and just add it as extra information into their chart to show that we are showing, hey, in their old socket, this is the presentation that they had. This is what we are requesting authorization for a new one. So benefits, they are just remarkable. For O&P practices, I have, in the beginning, when I first introduced the technology to a patient, my appointment is a little bit longer because they're geeked, they're excited about it. They want to know the ins and outs of it. But once we get into a flow, it really helps to pinpoint areas that we would have caught maybe weeks down the road where slight changes needed to be done then, and either the patient can give that good feedback, or sometimes it's just getting used to a socket. But rather than waiting for their limb to turn red, right, and present with problems later on, we're able to see it now. So for just your O&P practice, getting these CAD/CAM files into your system significantly easier. In New York, we have some insurance companies wanting measurements from random points in time. And so we will, if we scanned that cast, or if we scanned that socket, we have that information that we can then pull into another CAD/CAM system to measure. And so for O&P practices, it's a really great tool just to keep clinic workflow. For clinicians, again, for our new residents, even for experienced clinicians, we all have something to learn, right? You're only as good as your last patient. And so whether you have brand new patients, whether you have those very seasoned, experienced patients, this has definitely taught me how to give better education. It's taught me how to explain to patients what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And then for the patients, it gets through their appointments quicker. They have a new level of confidence in their fit and in their care, because they know that you are accurately being very mindful on what you're doing to their socket. And it creates this very engaging process to where they're more part of their healthcare. They're more involved and they truly enjoy seeing it. I think education is a big thing for our patients, and being able to show them, this is what your limb looks like when you don't put socks on. You see all that red at the bottom? That's what your leg will look like. That is what bottoming out looks like. Or, this is what it looks like with the proper sock apply. We've got a nice even distribution around. This is how your leg should feel. This is how your leg should look. This is how we prevent wounds or skin breakdown. And so with that, it's been a remarkable change for some very experienced patients that just, again, like Mark said, a lot of us are visual learners. They can actually see what their limb looks like now, and the consequences of ill-fitting sockets, we all can see much easier now. So yeah, I've had the great pleasure of being able to use it and really see patients change in their care. Next slide. Perfect.
So Mark,
Thanks, Cassandra. Yep, I'm ready to go. Thank you, Cassandra. Thanks. Those real world testimonials are really helpful for everybody to kind of understand the applications of this system. It's not theoretical. The technology is now here. It can be used every day in a practice. As we discussed earlier, we think the Sense system is something that can be used on a very significant portion of your patient population. And if you have the Insight Pro system, now you've got the digitizer as part of that package. You know, your full range of patients can gain benefit from knowing exactly what's going on in their socket and that process. For part of the Sense system in particular, we've begun to reach out to key central fabs throughout the US who we recognize as leaders in prosthetic fabrication, and are having discussions with them about working together with the Insight technologies. Certainly, there's an interest from their part for the digitizer in terms of replicating sockets, capturing plaster cast shapes very quickly, very accurately. That will help those central fabs with their just normal flow of providing diagnostic and definitive sockets for their customers. We're also working with those central fabs, though, and then kind of the next step of how does that fit into this idea of using socket pressure technology day to day in a practice. And so we've been working with them, and we'll probably announce within the next month a couple of formal relationships with a couple of those central fabs that will allow them to capture those shapes using the Insight digitizer, and also then capture that information as to where you want to put your sensor strips, and then being able to email that information back to you in a protected way so that you can use your Insight Sense system with a digitized shape that you receive back from a central fab who's working on those sockets for you. And maybe those are the patients who have more unusually shaped limbs that you want to make sure you get the exact information and not that need to go beyond the by measurement approach. And in talking to those central fabs, really what we're trying to do, we're lining up the use of the Insight technology with what's the normal kind of routine central fabrication process. Again, not trying to add a whole bunch of new steps, not trying to make it more difficult or take up more time, but making it very efficient in how you can use the socket pressure mapping technology within a central fab workflow. And so this kind of outlines that. We're following right along with the capability that central fab is going to make you a diagnostic socket based on either a plaster cast.
Hey Mark, we just lost your audio there. Just a moment. Can you unmute?
Yep. Is that better? Great. So what we're going to do, as that central fab then is creating your diagnostic socket, they're going to very quickly then take it over to the Insight digitizer and digitize that shape. Again, that happens very quickly. That digital file then will be sent back to the person who sent them the plaster cast or the CAD model. And so it'll actually arrive electronically before you ever even get your diagnostic socket back from the central fab due to the shipping time. So you'll have that information, and when the patient comes in, you're going to use that diagnostic socket. You're going to use your Insight Sense tools, the sensors, the wearables, the iPad, and you're going to go ahead and be able to identify where you've got areas that you might need to improve on in that diagnostic socket. You'll then be able to, as they finish and create your definitive, they'll again capture the internal shape of that using the digitizer and send that back to you, so that when you've got your definitive, you can once more capture your pressure readings within that socket. And that becomes part of your formal record. And as Cassandra says, we think that this leads to a documentation trail that allows you to show the patients, the physicians, the payers, what those different pressures have looked like over a period of time. When you send out your patient with your definitive socket, you're setting that as that's the standard. That's where things should be. And our software will be able to tell you exactly what the pressures look like at that point. Then if they come back 9 months, 12 months later, and you do a pressure test, and now you can compare it to what was the good, well-fitting socket that you sent them out with, you're now showing the differences. And when you show those differences, it's a reason why you have documentation for a replacement socket. Those are the kinds of things that these tools are going to allow you to do when it comes to documenting that process with the patient And we believe we've got that system now set up so that we'll be able to do that whether you have the Insight Pro system in your own office, or in the future, in the very near future, you'll be able to work with central fabs to accomplish that same thing. Next slide, please. So the last thing really to talk about in the Insight Pro is to kind of review everything that's involved. And it's the full system. It's got the broadest capabilities that the Adapttech technologies have. It includes the digitizer. It includes all of the socket pressure tools, the wearables, the sensor strips, iPad, and certainly then multiple software systems. So you'll have a software system that will allow you to work the digitizer exclusively, or you can work it with the app, whichever way that you want to do it. You know, when you look at that full system, you're really talking about the ability to not only capture the internal shape of a socket, an existing socket. Say you've got a socket you want to replicate. That patient absolutely loves this, how this socket feels. They don't want to give it to you to go replicate it. We all know alginate's an okay answer to replicating sockets, but not the perfect answer. There aren't a lot of great ways to replicate an existing socket. Now there is. Insight Digitizer allows you to do that. Also allows you to capture that internal shape of a plaster cast. So if you're a clinician who loves the way that the plaster casting process works for you and it creates great results, but you wish you could get that plaster cast into a digital world, we now have a system that allows you to do that. As Vanessa mentioned, you can capture that plaster cast shape, export it as an STL, put it into any CAD system that you want to do your modifications, and away you go. Those are great in and of itself with the digitizer, and there's a lot of value to that to clinics who are seeing a lot of patients, prosthetic patients, or to central fabs. There's a lot of value in that. The real value, though, of where Adapttech has brought to change is then what you do with that shape when it comes to identifying socket pressures and what that allows a clinician to be able to do. You're really allowing that clinician to have a window into what's going on real time in that socket as they're working with the patient. That improves how fast you can get to a definitive socket. You know, this trial and error, the chase of this time the patient comes in and they say it hurts here. This time the patient comes in and they say it hurts here. Oh, if it could just be a little better here. And before you know it, you've got 6 or 7 visits in diagnostics. And that's really an inefficient process. But the reality is that patient's trying, they're trying to tell you what it is, but they just are struggling to be able to do that accurately. This system allows you to know exactly where those pressures are occurring and to have an entirely different discussion with your patient, as Cassandra was mentioning, of this is what's really going on here. Now let's talk about how we use this information as in your daily life. So you really got an amazing tool to allow you to improve how fast you do those sockets. You've got an amazing tool that shows you what happens within the socket when you make alignment changes. The prosthetic profession has known for years and years and years that when I change the alignment, I can make drastic changes to what the patient feels in their socket. We can prove that. You can make one change to the alignment of a foot underneath that BK and have the patient walk for a minute and see dramatic changes in what they're feeling in their limb. Those could be good changes or those could be bad changes, but now we know exactly where they are. So you begin to look at the prosthesis as a whole, because now I know not only what's going on in the socket in terms of the fit, but then what the alignment does to it. And then I think the last thing just to really keep in the back of your mind is if you're working with residents, as Cassandra said, this is an amazing tool to help you in the mentoring process with your residents. The ability to capture what it is they created, show them what that socket fit looks like. They can listen to the person who's mentoring on them all they want, but then they've got to go create it. How do you tell them that it's good? How do you tell them where it needs improvement? You're depending upon patient feedback or what you can see through that transparent check socket plastic materials. Those aren't great tools to help the patient. We can now to help the resident to understand what the patient is experiencing. This tool really helps in that management of the residency process. It's a great tool to be able to do that. And the whole system, when you've got that together, it's a very powerful way to improve that process of learning for your residents. So that's everything that's in the full system. We would love to show you at the upcoming events. We've talked about those already. Frederick's going to be in Germany, and we'll be working with our distribution partner there. And then again, we will have the full Insight Pro system in San Antonio at the AOPA meeting in September. And we'll love to have you guys stop by the booth there and see how it works with patients real time as we work there at the AOPA meeting. Phil, I think that's everything I've got.
Wonderful, Mark. Thank you. So we've got a few more minutes now for questions and answers. We are meant to be finishing at the top of the hour, but we've got quite a number of questions that have come through. So we'll just keep going, overrun on time a little bit. I know everybody's busy, but it'd be great if you could hang around and just listen to these questions. So first question to Fred, if you're able to help, or anybody else that's able. The first question is from Sean McClure. What is the scannable volume of the digitizer?
So in terms of volume, it depends. There is a relation between the diameter and the height of the socket, because we are using a conical laser. But usually you can go up to 33 centimeters in diameter, and with that maximum diameter, you can go up to 22 centimeters height. Then if you have sockets with less diameter, you can have higher sockets. So it depends, but those are the general measurements we usually work with. Based on our experience, it needs to be a very large patient in order not to be able to fit the socket inside the scanner. We've been able to scan most of the sockets we've been working to.
Okay, Fred, thank you. And just one more from Sean. He asked, is the Sense system compatible with the Ischgl containment brim styles for AK sockets?
I think I can answer this one.
Thank you.
So yes, the answer is yes. The Insight Sense can use on Ischgl containment sockets, also on quadrilateral sockets, and in subischal sockets. For the transtibial sockets, it allows you to use with lower brims, high brims, and stand-up brims. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And a question from Carl Lindborg. Are you able to show changes in volume throughout the day to show volume change and provide socket management information to the user for proper sock management? So I guess that Mark did touch on that a bit, but I think it's a very interesting question.
Yeah, so the one thing that is important to clarify is that this system is to be used for a short periods of time, let's say. So it's with the prosthetist or with the physiotherapist. So it's to be used by a clinician. So it doesn't go home with the patient. So you won't be seeing those changes throughout the day in real time. But when you're doing that analysis in the clinic, or if you do it in the morning and then later in the day, you will be able to clearly see those volume changes. I've actually been on one of Cassandra's study cases where we did exactly that. We had a patient that had the socket was very loose, so we started trying different socks by going to higher ply levels, and you could see that the patient was going from having a limb that was pistoning inside the socket into that total contact and stopping that movement inside the socket. So it's possible to see those volume changes.
Okay, that's great, Fred. Thank you. And just another question from Carl. In fact, kind of two questions. The first one is relating to the data. It says, is the Insight Sense cloud-based, or is the data able to be processed locally? First question. Second question was also, can the scanner be used to scan and store other socket designs that do not use the sensors? So two questions.
So for the first question, the Insight Sense is also cloud-based. So the data processing is done on the cloud. And for the second question, the scanner can be used to scan without the sensors, yes. So you don't need to have the sensors to be able to scan and start the socket designs. Okay,
very good, thank you. And question from Jeffrey Danoon, IMU placement of importance. I've seen it placed distal and proximal in socket sensors. So I guess the question is guidance on IMU placement and the importance of that.
About the placement of IMU, as Cassandra told you before, the IMU, it's needed to know where your patient is, in which gate faces it is. So when you have a transtibial socket, the IMU will be placed on above the knee, And when you have a transfemoral socket, it will be placed below the knee. But it can be changed if you're using a vacuum system when you have a transtibial socket. So because our sensors, you need to change the position between the wearable and IMU, but it will work perfectly. The only thing that it's important that it's the both devices need to be faced laterally. So this is about the position of the wearables and the IMU.
Okay, that's great, Vanessa. Thank you. And we've got two questions which are kind of relational. So the one is from Munir Afari and Luis Miguel and Janiero Rodriguez. The questions are, in one go, by your experience, what is the total surface you can explore? And then the second question is, when using the full system, does the pressure values become absolute? Does it give the surface area volume? So perhaps I'm not correct in putting those together, but it's all about total surface and surface volume.
Yeah, so in terms of the volume, I think it's related to the other point of what we can scan. In terms of how much you can cover with the sensors, so you can use up to 8 strips of 8 sensors in the sense, and there is also a possibility of using a larger wearable for the Pro system, where you can use 12 strips of 8 sensors. So that will allow you to cover most of the socket in sensors, unless it's a very large transfemoral socket. In terms of absolute pressure, no. At the moment, there's no feature that would allow you to see absolute pressure in the system.
Okay, great, thank you. And another sort of a question from Munir is, does the digitizer enable you to calculate pressure compared to the surface it scans, or is it just to get the inside shape of the socket to ease the visual part?
So the reason why we capture the shape and location of the sensors is to understand where the problems are occurring and to be able to ease exactly that visual interpretation and the changes. So it will not calculate the pressure by relating that with the surface itself.
Okay, great, thank you. And one last question from Carl. What experience have you had with identifying proper relief in an existing socket for individuals who have heterotropic ossification happening or a neuroma that needs relief?
Yeah, I can answer this because I've done both of these. I've had patients with HOs. I have someone that has a neuroma that where the ball, we can actually visually see where that cluster of neuroma formation is from the surface of the skin. However, the pain he experiences is on the other side. So his neuroma is lateral, but he feels a significant amount of discomfort medially, right? So you would think, oh, well, maybe I need to relieve the medial side, or, what do I need to do? So with that neuroma, I placed a strip right over it. And it was just one little corner of that neuroma that just had too much contact. And so it's actually really, really great for patients with neuromas, because sometimes we don't know if it's a socket contact issue or if it's a neuroma issue, right? If our socket's too tight over that neuroma, then absolutely it's going to cause that neuroma to become very uncomfortable. But then sometimes you can relieve it all day and have nothing touching that neuroma, and then that's a surgical intervention. And then you have the skills to be able to confidently say, listen, they are getting no pressure over that neuroma. Prosthetically, this cannot be solved, or prosthetically there's not an optimal solution. You can cut windows in your sockets, all of these things, but sometimes those neuromas need to be removed. And so I think it's been really helpful in those ways for those patients that are struggling with very particular areas of sensitivity, or with phantom sensations also. Sometimes we don't always know where they've reattached nerves back to, and so the sensations that individuals get in their limbs may not be over where that nerve is in their limb. And so it's been very helpful in that way, actually one of the most helpful parts of having the system.
Great, Cass, thank you. And I think we'll take one last question and then we'll wrap things up. This is a question from Mohammed Kaki. He asks, does the product need regular maintenance, especially the Insight digitizer?
So there is no regular maintenance required. The only thing it might require is to be recalibrated after if you move it from to a different place, or if you accidentally impact the laser head, there might exist a need for a new calibration, but that's something we can support remotely and do quite relatively quickly. So it's not a big problem.
Great, Fred. Thank you. Well, we're at 5 past the top of the hour now, so I think we'll wrap things up. Great questions, everybody. Thank you so much for those. It's always great to have proper questions from the floor. So I think a big thank you to our presenters today, to Federico, Vanessa, Cassandra, Frederic, and Mark, and of course to all of the team who've put this presentation together today. So thanks very much for joining us today, and don't forget to stop by at AAOP if you're in the US next week. So thanks very much, everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you.